Good day and welcome to CDI Talks. My name is Anton Shekhovtsov and I'm the chair of the Center for Democratic Integrity, an Austria-based NGO that analyzes attempts of authoritarian regimes to influence politics and societies in Europe. My guest today is a prominent French diplomat and politician, Nathalie Loiseau. She joined the French Foreign Service in 1968 and she worked for the Foreign Ministry for 26 years. In 2017, during the presidency of Emmanuel Macron, she was appointed Minister for European Affairs. In 2019, she resigned to lead the electoral list of Macron's party, the Republic on the Move, in the 2019 European elections. Today, Nathalie Loiseau is a member of the European Parliament, where she chairs the Subcommittee on Security and Defence. She's a high-profile member of the centrist Renew Europe group, and she has been, since 2020, the group's coordinator in the Special Committee on Foreign Interference in all democratic processes in the European Union, including disinformation. I caught up with Nathalie Loiseau in Paris to discuss foreign interference in European politics, Russia's attempts to undermine democracy, and the challenges of Russia's ongoing aggression against Ukraine. I hope you will find our conversation useful, and if you do like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay updated on future episodes of CDI Talks. Nathalie, thank you so much for this meeting, that you agreed to talk to me about very important topics that we have on our table. And I would like first to ask you about the committee that looks specifically at the foreign interference in all democratic processes in the European Union, including disinformation. This committee was launched just a little bit more than 2 years ago. What do you think, what was the main reason to establish this committee?
Well, the European Parliament realized that democracy is under attack. We consider that we are at peace, but democracies are threatened. We saw it with the Brexit referendum, we saw it with the US election in 2016, and there were reasons to consider that we were also witnessing it in the European Union. And we needed a special committee because when it comes to hybrid warfare, if I may say so, it goes in the right direction of the Defense Committee, which I chair, but also on the Committee on Public Liberties, or the committees dealing with digital platforms. So we try to have an overall approach in this special committee. And after 2 years of work, after a first report which was adopted by the European Parliament, we found out that we needed to work even more. So we are once again a special committee working for an additional, let's say, 18 months to 2 years to make sure that all recommendations are implemented and to prepare for the 2024 European election. 2024 will be quite a year. The year of European election, the year of American election, of Russian election and Ukrainian election. Can you imagine what sort of challenges we are going to face?
But going back a little bit to this INGE committee and the first report, or the final report, it is a huge resolution with recommendations, and also a lot was just spelled out. For the very first time, the European Parliament clearly identified the countries and also the processes that are vulnerable, and the countries that are trying to undermine somehow European democracy and the liberal democratic consensus in a way. What are the most important recommendations in your view coming out of that report and the resolution, because there are dozens of recommendations? Yes. What needs to be done? What needs to be done first?
First, we have to harmonize the national legislations about electoral processes and make sure that no foreign money can finance political parties when they are running for election. This is the case in some member states, but not all of them. And when I say foreign money, it can be quite difficult to track where the money comes from. So it's of course no foreign public money, but we have to look at foreign foundations. Everything that looks like a third state should not be allowed to provide grants or loans to political parties in Europe. That's the first. Seems obvious, but we are not there yet. We also have to regulate political advertising and the targeting of the audience. We know the role it had with Cambridge Analytica in 2016 in the US, so we have to work in this direction, and there is regulation being discussed right now between the European Parliament and the Council. But we have to look further. For instance, research and universities. They are very much open to foreign corporations, and that seems fine, and it is fine to have students and researchers being able to work together. But sometimes we have been very naive, and a number of our universities are cooperating with foreign universities linked to foreign armies, for instance, or there is a steal of public research that can be used by competitors or adversaries, or we should know for certain, for instance, when a think tank publishes a paper or organizes a conference, who is paying? Because very often you see experts on TV channels talking about the war in Ukraine, for instance. If you don't know what is their daily pay, if they work for consulting companies, they may be consulting companies working for Gazprom, for instance. I don't want to forbid everything. We are liberal democracies, but transparency is as important for something like news as it is for food or beverages.
You mentioned a very important and sensitive issue: foreign money for political parties that are running in the elections. We all know this example about Front National. Now it's called in a different way, National Rally, Rassemblement National, and the bank loan that Le Pen's party received in 2014 for the regional elections of 2015. It was 9 million euros. The question here is, Le Pen would explain why she decided to borrow money from a Russian bank. Well, it was called the the first Czech Russian bank, although by that time it was already almost completely Russian. She would explain this, saying that I tried to borrow money from a French bank. I tried to borrow money from another EU bank, and she was denied. Mm. Well, then she had to. Well, if we take her word for granted, yeah. Yes, but she had to turn, because otherwise they would not be able to run. Do you think that something should be changed so political parties of such caliber, and Front National was not a minor party, mm-hmm. it was quite a big party already, that they should be allowed, that they should be allowed to borrow money from a French bank, so they don't need to talk to a foreign country and be probably dependent on them? Mm.
Well, we heard her narrative time and again. I just wonder how come other rather radical parties manage to borrow money from French banks. Look at the recent French presidential election. A very far left candidate like Nathalie Loiseau, she's really far left. She had no problem finding money from French banks. The communist candidate had no problem finding money from French banks. So it's not a question of French banks refusing out of principle to finance radical candidates. It has more to do with the mismanagement practices of the Front National, which is very well known for its very bad reputation in terms of management of money and even of repaying its debts. And we know that the Russian loan was rescheduled First, it was transferred to another Russian company, which is not even a bank, which works on aircrafts and has relations with the Syrian army of Bashar al-Assad. Exactly. But it rescheduled the loan. So you don't have that many normal, serious banks willing to engage with a party which is not serious in terms of management of funds. And now the new loan, which was done by the National Rally, was done with a Hungarian bank from Viktor Orban. So these are very specific choices. And the far right is the only one to make these sort of choices.
Let's go back to the new committee on foreign interference, this ING2, and you said that it was set up specifically probably for the elections, for the European elections. And do you really expect foreign countries to be actively engaged in interfering in these European elections? Because in 2019, I don't think that foreign countries, well, even Russia, tried to interfere in the European elections, because they always tried probably more to interfere in national elections, but not the European Parliament.
Well, they probably gave it a try, and if you see the pattern that far-right political parties all have relations with Russia. It's true in Germany, it's true in Italy, it's true in Austria. Well, you could tell me that in Austria many political parties have relations with Russia. But it's a pattern. And they have tried, Russia has tried to gain influence and to fight against the European Union, because the European Union project per se is something that Russia is fighting against. We also know that there are Chinese interferences in the European Parliament, which we are confronting. So let us face it, we represent a model of liberal democracies and of a more powerful European Union, which can assert its values and confront authoritarian regimes. So they will do whatever they can to weaken this model. So let us just not be naive, working on financing of political parties, on political advertising, on elite capture, which we saw in the recent years. I mean, a previous German chancellor, a previous French prime minister working for Russian companies is something that obviously makes you think twice that we should organize ourselves better.
It's interesting that you mentioned this new challenge, which is Chinese influence.
Right.
Previously, well, even several years ago, China tried to influence Europe, the European Union, mostly through economy, through economic cooperation. But now we see China essentially learning, probably from Russia, to start political influence, political malign influence. So not only through economy, but now also the economic pressure, especially in Central Eastern Europe, in the Western Balkans, but also this political pressure. They are learning, and probably they are learning fast.
Yeah, and they have means, and they have a number of people engaged in spreading disinformation. It was obvious when the COVID crisis started. All these blurring attempts around the origin of the virus, all this disinformation targeting a lab in the United States, saying it came from there, was organized from China. You see the same sort of things about Hong Kong, about the Uyghurs, about topics which are first and foremost relevant for China, but not only. For instance, now that Russia Today and Sputnik were suspended in Europe, you see Chinese disinformation using Russian narrative to describe the war in Ukraine. So obviously, I think they learn from each other. You see Russia closing its domestic information space the way China did it some years ago already. And you see China using its tools to spread narratives which sound more like Russian narratives than in the past.
They are indeed trying to learn from Russia and promote some Russian narratives. For example, China decided to side with Russia this winter on the NATO issue. We've seen this. But also I mentioned China because a couple of years ago there was this very unpleasant story actually about how China convinced some officials or European bureaucrats to remove some notes on China from the reports about disinformation, and that was an institution that was, I think, part somehow of the European External Action Service, and China succeeded with its operation to remove some mentions of China in a dubious context.
Yes, it happened, and we put light on it, and I know that it will not happen again. Now that we are paying a lot of attention to defend our freedom to state what we see and what we think. It was local at that time. It was the initiative of local, I would say, bureaucrats in Beijing who accepted to censor their own paper. But it should not have happened. And the clear signal we gave from the European Parliament was to say, never do this again. To say it to the EAS and to say it to the Chinese authorities. Don't try to interfere. Don't try to influence in another manner than your normal job of diplomat, trying to convince others that you're doing the right thing. But don't try to put pressure.
You mentioned also the Chinese technology, probably that they have new means of interference. And I myself, when I was reading this resolution that was prepared by the INGE committee, I noticed one particular thing that I find even in short-term, mid-term perspective, very dangerous. That is the rise of artificial intelligence and the rise of deepfakes, where you can create a reality which is not a reality, but you can fool people so easily. And we've seen some jokes already, featuring this deepfakes, people known for their positions, and on those deepfakes they will be arguing against their own positions. Do you feel also maybe that this is the challenge that probably we are not even prepared?
It's one of the challenges, and there will be many, because when we think of hybrid warfare, we see how fast it evolves, and we have to adjust and to adapt to evolution. For instance, we used to talk a lot about troll factories or troll farms. It still exists, and you will find some, for instance, in Africa. But it's not the main way of spreading disinformation right now. As regards deepfakes, a number of member states are working on technologies to be able to recognize deepfakes. And we are also putting pressure on the social media, on platforms, so that they label clearly when it's a deepfake, that they get the proper instruments. And it's a deepfake, well, you can still watch it, because it can be a joke, it can be fiction, and we don't want to censor innocent contents, I would say, harmless contents. But it has to be labeled. The viewers have to know that what they are looking at is a deepfake. Yeah,
I think it's good that you mentioned that sometimes deepfakes are done as jokes,
yes.
And some false news are satirical news. We, I think, know this magazine, The Onion, which is a great source of fake news, but it's these fake news, they are meant to highlight particular social problems, social issues. So it's not meant to do harm.
Yeah,
so,
exactly, and why not? This is freedom of expression. Exactly. But at the moment where it's conceived to deceive, this is something else. You remember that at the very beginning of the war in Ukraine, there was a deep fake of President Zelensky asking the Ukrainian military to stop fighting. The good thing was that immediately people realized that it was a deep fake because the quality was not that good. But let's be certain that the quality will improve, so there needs to be technologies able to find out that it's a deep fake.
Nathalie, I know that you visited Kiev, you visited Ukraine several times already since the renewal of the invasion of Ukraine, now the full-fledged invasion of Ukraine. And you were accompanying President Emmanuel Macron on a very important visit to Ukraine in May, where you brought good news together with Scholz. What are your impressions from those visits? Because the situation changed.
Yeah.
The situation changed. What are your impressions from visiting Kiev and talking to people?
Well, the situation keeps on changing, but the resolve of the Ukrainian people remains. And when I talk to French military, they always refer to Ukraine saying that there is no good army if there is not a national unity. And they call it moral strength of a nation to support the struggle of the military. And this is extremely impressive when you go to Ukraine. Of course, now, at the moment where we are talking, there are different Ukraines. The one in the west, where you very rarely have alerts, where people are working, are growing their crops, are reopening cafes and doing whatever they can. And it's impressive because it really, everything is done as if they want to really get back to normal, not to be defeated by being forced to live in a degraded condition. Then of course, the more you're nearing the front line, the more difficult it is. And I would say the Ukrainian authorities were candidly speaking of July, August as a very difficult period to expect. Because fighting in Donbass is not the same as fighting in the suburbs of Kiev. It's not urban fight, it's artillery. And we know that the Russians simply keep on bombing from a distance because probably they don't want to fight in person, and they don't hesitate to destroy what they conquer. But let's face it, it's been several months since the war started. The Russians had not expected it would last several months, and the territorial gains they made are not spectacular. So there is a strong resistance. For this, we need to keep on supplying military equipment and even to increase the rhythm of the supply, and we will do it. But because there is no way that we can accept that Russia wins this war, but it doesn't go according to the plan, contrary to what Putin keeps on saying.
I know that you personally, you supported the idea of supplying weapons to Ukraine from the very beginning, and even before that. That I know, it's not the recent turn for you. But I would like to ask you about France in general. As you may know, probably better than me, there is criticism of the position of France in this war, for this invasion. There is criticism of President Macron that he kept on calling Putin and talked to him, although many would say it doesn't make sense. Putin is not listening, he just buying time, or he just using time in order to advance his own interests and not the interests of Ukraine or the European Union. What would you respond to this criticism of France and its hesitance also to supply heavy armaments to Ukraine?
Well, first on armaments, because we were talking about it before, there is no hesitancy. When you know that there are 18 Caesar cannons in Ukraine, it's huge. It's a huge part of our own stockpile, and it's very effective on the ground. And a number of military equipment which are provided by the French military are not made public. It's the decision of the French government. It's classified. One of the reasons may be that we are involved in other external operations in Iraq against Daesh, in Sahel. And we don't want our adversaries to know what we do with our military equipment for obvious reasons. But it was clear from the start, and 100% of the promises made by Emmanuel Macron to Volodymyr Zelensky in terms of military equipment have been kept. And the equipment is on the ground. The training is taking place and everything is going. As regards the discussions that President Macron has had with Vladimir Putin, we should all remember that Vladimir Putin refuses to talk to Volodymyr Zelensky. So someone has to do the middleman. If not a European, there will be someone else. It might be Erdogan, and we know that it's an ambiguous partner. Turkey is a member of NATO, but we've seen that it's not completely aligned with NATO in terms of no sanctions, presence of oligarchs, and well, there is a competition and a coexistence between Turkey and Russia on many battlefields. Or if not, Erdogan might well be Xi Jinping, and I'm not sure I would like it. So someone in the European Union has to do it. It came at the moment where France had the presidency at the Council of the European Union, so Macron decided he would be the one. Each time he was calling Putin, he had talked to Zelensky in advance. Very often it was at the request of the Ukrainian president. And of course he was referring his conversation to Zelensky in return. I'm not sure that Vladimir Putin is so happy now that the number of conversations were made public, showing that the Russian president has been lying, but Macron had no doubt about it. He just thought that if we could make some progress on humanitarian corridors, on people stuck in the Azovstal facility in Mariupol, all these sort of things, he had to try. It was a moral duty. And the day, which has not come, but the day where the war stops, Putin will probably still be in power, whether we like it or not. So someone will have to represent the interest of the European Union and European security at the table. Otherwise, European security will be decided without Europe, and I don't think it's reasonable.
Nathalie, I also know that you are a great supporter of the idea of more autonomy, of more strategic autonomy for Europe, of a European Defence Union. You were very vocal in defending this idea before the invasion. Has anything changed for you with the invasion of Ukraine? Because what we see now, still the Americans provide most of the military help to Ukraine. There is a huge difference between what is being supplied by the Americans and what is being supplied by the Europeans. Do you still believe that the idea of strategic autonomy and the European Defence Union is still viable?
I'm absolutely certain that NATO and European Defence Union are complementary, and both are necessary. Indeed, you're right to say that the United States is providing the biggest part of military equipment to Ukraine, and rightly so. But I would like Europeans to be up to the challenge, not to compete, but to complement what the US is doing, which means that we need to invest more, to dedicate more money to our military expenses. And this is ongoing, and that's good news. I also consider that I remember I was in September 2021 in Washington. I had exchanges in the Pentagon, in the State Department, in the NSC, and so on and so forth. At that time, nobody in Washington was talking about Russia or Ukraine. You remembered that President Biden was expecting to have a stable and predictable partner with Russia. Everything was about China and the famous pivoting to China. And we were the ones, or delegation, mentioning that there were more and more Russian troops gathering next to the Ukrainian border, and that for us that was a huge concern. Well, it reached the decision makers in Washington. It reached their ears and their brains, and they performed well, except that they had very good intelligence, but didn't provide sufficient heavy weaponry before the war started. I still wonder why no combat aircrafts were provided to Ukraine before February 24th. That would have made such a difference. But it's a collective mistake I'm talking about. And then we are seeing that NATO is getting bigger for good reasons. Finland and Sweden are joining. But we know that we are under a blackmail from Turkey for the accession of Sweden and Finland, and the story is not over. I hope that Turkey will understand that they cannot play with security of two candidates to the accession to NATO. But still, I'm not 100% certain. And what happens if a new president comes to the United States, which has the same mindset as Donald Trump and has less interest in security of Europe? We cannot depend on the votes of a few voters in Iowa. So it's not a competition between NATO and the EU. It's to be complementary. And there are obviously some vital interests, which are European vital interests. And Ukraine will remain a European vital interest out of geography, history, and culture. But also maybe what's taking place in Libya is more of interest to us than it is to the United States. And I would not blame the Americans not to be as interested as we are. So we have to act within the alliance every time we can. And this is a very strong statement. But we have to be able to act autonomously every time we have to. Instead of ringing the door and say, "Oh, Uncle Sam, are you interested in what's happening to me?"
And you recently were in Bosnia, where I think foreign interference is also at play, not only Russian, but also the Chinese. And you visited Srebrenica. It was the very sad anniversary of the genocide in Srebrenica. But now we see that the Russian war against Ukraine has become the deadliest war in Europe since the Second World War. It has already surpassed, in just a few months, it has already surpassed the toll in Yugoslavia, in the civil war in Yugoslavia. Do you see any connection, any link, historical link or political link between what is happening now and what was happening in Srebrenica?
Yes, in both cases, it's just as if the 20th century was not over, that this notion that you should repair the losses of the recent past, it's very much in the mindset of authoritarian regimes. You hear it time and again in Moscow, of course. You hear it in Belgrade and with the Bosnian Serbs. You hear it in Ankara with the anniversary of the Trianon Treaty and Lausanne Treaty, sort of a nostalgia for the Ottoman Empire. And the notion of sphere of influence, which is normally outdated in a rules-based order, is back in the mindsets. And if you look at children textbooks in schools, this is terrifying. In Bosnia, Bosniak children don't learn the same history as Bosnian Serbs or Bosnian Croats, although they still live more or less side by side, even after the massacres and the genocide. So it's extremely dangerous. And if from outside you play with these notions that you're a Serbian minority, let's talk about the Russian minority in Ukraine or the Russian-speaking minority in Ukraine, it fuels tensions that can be dangerous. And now the other similarity is that all these tensions, all these disagreements, which could be handled through diplomacy or dialogue, immediately transform into military action. It's not the case in Bosnia, but we should not wait until it comes back.
In conclusion of our conversation, I would like to ask you about your book. I know that you've already written a book on foreign interference. I presume parts of these book were probably the result of the work in the INGE committee, but probably also in this subcommittee on security and defense. Can you talk a little bit more about your book?
Well, I would like my fellow citizens to realize that we have enjoyed peace for decades, but that right now we are not exactly in peace. Our democracies are under attack. This hybrid warfare is not only something that academics write about as a hypothesis for the future, it's already the present. Disinformation, cyber attacks, elite capture, influences through universities or research centers, everything is already here. Our liberal democratic model is considered as a threat to authoritarian regimes. Autocrats, they only want to stay in power. The reason for me why Ukraine was attacked by Putin is that Ukraine was beginning to become a counter model to Russia. A Slav country able to choose democracy, able to start fighting against corruption, able to look towards Brussels rather than towards Moscow. A success of a liberal Ukraine would have demonstrated all the failures of current Russia. So Putin probably wanted to stop that because it would have threatened his own power. So we have to be aware. In my book, I'm trying to raise awareness about the situation. We have to understand who is targeting us, who is being targeted, how it works, how methods evolve in time, and how do we have to react without changing who we are. We should not become autocracies just because we are attacked. Look at COVID. In the very beginning of the pandemic, we heard from different sources that it was more efficient to be an autocracy to fight a pandemic. 2 years later, the best protected continent on Earth is Europe. Yes, we debated. Yes, we were divided. Yes, it was difficult. We struggled. We missed some opportunities. We didn't do everything right. But at the end of the day, we were able to protect both our citizens and our economies and our liberties. So that's a good example that when we realize what's at stake, when we organize ourselves, we can protect our values, we can protect the way we live, we can remain democracies and fight against this other virus of autocracy.
On this very optimistic note, I would like to thank you, Nathalie, for this conversation, and I wish you good luck with your political work and also work as a person who wants to enlighten your compatriots about foreign interference and the challenges that we are facing.
Thank you.